Hello, Matt.
Hello, Bill.
How are you today?
I'm doing great today. It's a great day.
You were exempt from the October snowstorm?
Yeah, here in D.C. it just kind of rained, but out west, my mom lives in Pennsylvania, and I'm from Maryland, and they got some snow. So, but it's cold. It's getting cold here, and it's starting to feel a little bit like winter. So the times they are changing.
Up here in New England, we got hit fairly hard. I was out of power for 36 hours. There's a third of my backyard is now tree. And it's been a very weird year. We've had in Western Mass, we've had an urban tornado. We've had a hurricane that caused some major river flooding, and now we've had the October snowstorm and a multi-day blackout. So, folks around here are talking about global warming. I'm sure the right is not looking at those terms, though.
And you know who's endured a storm, Bill? Is Herman Cain.
That's a professional segue.
Speaking of storms... everyone's talking, of course, about the Herman Cain story. I'm sure we're not the first to talk about it, so I don't know that we need to delve into all the details. I got a video up here, and it's auto-playing, which is annoying. So I'm going to cancel it. But Red State made an interesting observation. Eric Erickson at Red State, which is that you probably noticed, Bill, when the first allegations surfaced, conservatives by and large rallied to Herman Cain's defense. But now that Herman Cain blamed Rick Perry for the leak, which, by the way, Mark Block, Cain's chief of staff, a day later, which on Thursday, went on Fox News and seemed to walk back the allegation. That was a tactical error, one of many mistakes Cain has made in this crisis management debacle. And the problem is that by blaming Rick Perry, Cain now has alienated some conservatives who either like Perry or view him as the only viable alternative to Romney. And Eric Erickson really went after Cain several times on Red State, and he's just one of many conservatives. So an interesting turn of events.
Do you think that is? I mean, I feel like from my outside the conservative movement perspective, that I feel I'm getting a jumble of messages coming out of all this. You have some people who have been very diehard Cain defenders, very quick to chalk this up to liberal media persecution, another high-tech lynching, using Clarence Thomas's phrase, and suggesting that if Perry did do this, that this would be some sacrilegious thing, because politicians never drop opposition research to the media about their rivals. That's such an unheard of thing to do.
Right.
And so there's that faction, and there's another faction seems to be saying that Cain has to answer these questions, and no one can expect a free ride, and I'm going to wait and see until Cain answers this stuff satisfactorily before I stand by him. But you seem to be suggesting that it's tilting more into an anti-Cain direction in the conservative blogosphere.
Well, a couple things, Bill. First of all, I think that Cain was sort of universally defended initially from the charges by conservatives. And then I think that much of the criticism has been a result of his inept handling of this crisis. But I think he really hurt himself with this attack on Rick Perry, which was unsubstantiated, and they did not have the goods. And to make that kind of an allegation was incredibly short-sighted and unwise, and I think the product of that has been some conservatives who either support Perry or may view Perry as now the only way to stop Romney, and alienated them. But let me say, Ben Smith at Politico wrote a very interesting piece today, which I also think deserves some mention, pointing out the generation gap between how conservatives view Herman Cain. Some conservatives who are older, according to Smith, like the Rush Limbaughs, view this through a Clarence Thomas prism. And they see Cain as fighting this, quote, high-tech lynching. some younger conservatives view this more as a Bill Clinton issue. And they see Cain parsing words, saying things like, well, I said that there was no settlement, but there was an agreement, not a settlement. So there may be a little more intellectually honest and a little less interested in fighting for their guy, so to speak, as opposed to just sort of getting to the truth. But that's an interesting piece that Ben Smith wrote, and it's an interesting observation. But I do think at the end of the day, much of the criticism is not, I mean, I still have no idea if Cain is guilty of any of these allegations. He could very well be innocent, but he is clearly guilty of running a very bad campaign, and of being very bad.
Isn't it established at this point that there was a settlement?
That there was.
I mean, is that even disputed at this point?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely been established that there was a payout. Of course, this is where Cain got into trouble. Initially, he said, I don't know if there was. It would have been the National Restaurant Association. If there was, I hope they didn't pay a lot because I didn't do anything. Later, he sort of made that legalistic argument, well, I thought it was an agreement, not a settlement. And then he sort of gave that up. But no, it's very clear that I think at least 2 women received some sort of a settlement. Now, that, of course, is no admission of guilt. As you know,
but
people who are oftentimes corporations and organizations pay people off as a form of tribute because it's just cheaper and easier to get rid of them. But that doesn't change the fact that it was an issue. It was an issue he knew about for a decade. And by the way, at the Daily Caller Thursday, I put up this piece of a conference call, a conference call Cain held with conservative bloggers in March, where conservatives were concerned that because they want to beat Obama and because Cain's never been elected before, he hasn't been vetted, he was asked point blank whether or not he had any skeletons in his closet. And I have the audio of this posted at the Daily Caller. He joked about golf. He starts off saying, all they're going to find is that I'm a mediocre golfer. Then he went on to say, I do have my original birth certificate. I have no illegitimate babies. I don't have any mistresses. And he flatly denied that there was anything that could get him in trouble if there was Oppo research done. He did not mention the fact that these settlements had occurred, and by the way, it might have been handy information. He should have brought it out himself. The rule number 1 in politics is you do research on yourself. When in doubt, bring it out. He should have brought this out. He could have picked his own reporter. He could have come to me. I would have written this story. He could have had the timing right. I mean, I would have written it fairly. But rather than playing defense and responding to another random reporter you don't know, you could have picked the reporter you know that you think is going to be fair about it. You could have picked the timing. You could bring it up, frame the debate. This is Politics 101. He failed Politics 101.
Yeah, and I mean, but all that presumes that the guy was trying to become president in the first place, doesn't it? That he's trying to play by regular political rules, and I've had.
Look, I'm not arguing he should run a conventional campaign. I'm just arguing he should run a campaign.
Well, I had this conversation with Kristen Soltis before. I think all the available evidence is that he's not running a presidential campaign, and anything that's happening here is just publicity for publicity's sake. So yes, if he was trying to actually win the election, he would do Politics 101 and air out his dirty laundry early on his own terms. But if you're just trying to be in the media circus for a period of time to raise your profile, then I guess it doesn't really matter, does it?
Well, that's a good question, whether or not he's ever was a serious candidate. I mean, I would argue in retrospect, even if he were just in it for publicity, he would have been well served to have framed this his way rather than allowing it to come out on someone else's timetable, on someone else's terms. It could be that he never thought he was going to win, and he never thought he was going to be in this enviable position as he was in, leading the polls, and that it wouldn't come up because nobody would care. And that would have certainly been true. But whatever the case may be, it was a miscalculation. And now Republicans and conservatives must ask themselves, do you want someone to be your president to go up, or at least to go up against Barack Obama, who appears to be incapable of running a professional operation, and I fear that unconventional has become a code word for unprofessional.
Let me ask you a related question here. For a long time, conservatives looked at almost the whole issue of sexual harassment as a sort of PC, nanny state, free speech police kind of thing. So what if you make, a raunchy joke in the office? Big deal. Why should we litigate everything? And sort of push back on the whole concept of it. And it doesn't seem like that's what at least some conservatives are doing now. At least some conservatives seem to be saying, if he engaged in sexual harassment in the workplace, that is bad. We think that's a bad thing. And where other conservatives seem to be trying to treat this in a more glib fashion, do you think there is a change in conservative attitudes about the nature of sexual harassment itself in the wake of this?
No, I think that the question is what people don't know what he did. The Politico story says that he made a hand gesture which was not sexual in nature, and that he said things which made these women feel uncomfortable. I think if that is all there is, then Cain probably doesn't have a problem substantively. His problem then is just that he has mishandled this, that he has bungled the crisis management and the public relations. And by the way, that's disqualifying, in my opinion, even if he's entirely innocent of the substance. I think most conservatives are against sexual harassment if it's really sexual harassment. If someone comes to your wife or my wife and says, hey baby, you need to wear some. I'm not gonna say it. But if someone says your employment is contingent on favors or on how you dress or says things which are clearly inappropriate, I think almost every conservative would be critical of that and find it offensive and would be entirely supportive of taking action against that. The question though is it flirtation? Is it someone is overly sensitive? Is this an example of someone who is just an employee who's disgruntled? Or someone now coming forward later, is the case of the third person now maybe seeking the spotlight. Those are real questions. So I think the question is, how legitimate is the charge? If it's a case of him behaving in a way that is clearly over the line, that is clearly egregious, most conservatives would say, punish him. If it's a case of him complimenting a woman on looking nice today, then I think that is political correctness run amok. And frankly, we probably have all been guilty of that. If that's the standard of what harassment is these days.
So getting back to politics for a sec, do you think that conservatives at this point are? Do you think conservatives are treating Herman Cain like a serious candidate, and therefore it's a candidacy that needs to be saved? Or are there people, maybe Eric Erickson's in this boat saying, look, if we want to stop Romney, we need to get behind one conservative person and consolidate the conservative vote, and Herman Cain's getting in the way of the only plausible conservative candidate here, and that's Rick Perry. So let's kick, if Cain, whether or not, regardless of the facts of the situation, the way that he's handled it is so poor, he's clearly not ready for prime time. Let's get rid of this guy and get him off the front page so we can focus on this being a Perry-Romney race. What do you think is the dominant view among conservative
I think
bloggers?
some conservatives are making that calculation, and that's why the attack on Perry was a mistake, aside from the fact that they didn't have the goods. I just talked to Ed Morrissey. I was on his show, the Ed Morrissey Show from Hot Air. He believes that Newt Gingrich is the next guy, that Newt Gingrich is a legitimate challenge to Mitt Romney. I don't agree with him on that. I like Newt. I find Newt utterly fascinating. I just think there's too much baggage, and I think Rick Perry is the viable alternative to Romney with his money and his jobs record and all that. But I do think, regardless I think that Cain now enters this phase of his campaign where he has become a joke, not because of the specific allegations, not because they have any merit, because we don't know if they do or not.
It's the singing, isn't it? The singing makes him a joke, right?
No, it's not the singing.
You sure it's not the singing? I think it's the singing.
I think it's Mark Bloch who Herman Cain should dispatch Mark Bloch and fire him immediately. He should have left D.C. instead of everything he's done, and since this crisis presented itself, has been flawed. And conservatives want to beat Barack Obama, and they want a serious conservative who can do that. And the response, I really think that the biggest change I've seen this week is that conservatives are worried about Herman Cain's ability to actually run a serious campaign, and they have, he sold himself as a problem solver, and he's not solving this problem. The other problem he has is likability. The reason people were so Herman Cain's opponents in the press, they kept scratching their head because the guy doesn't know anything about foreign affairs, and yet he's still popular. And he flip-flops on abortion, and yet he goes up in the polls. And people were pulling their hair. They're so frustrated. Why? And the reason is that people liked Herman Cain. His credibility was never based on foreign policy expertise or even on being a culture warrior who was consistent. His credibility, his success has always been based on likability. And the problem with this issue is it threatens his likability, both in terms of the substance and in terms of his reaction to it. Criticizing Perry threatens his likability. Yelling at reporters Wednesday threatens his likability. It could help him, but it also could threaten his likability. So that's the real danger here. Is he competent enough, and do we still like him? Those are the questions that next week we'll know whether or not this is still viable.
Let me ask you a sensitive question, Matt.
I did not... Okay, go ahead.
A racial question.
All right.
So I hear liberals pontificate about this. I'm curious if conservatives are thinking this way. Is there a strain of the conservative movement that is saying to itself, Obama only won because he is black and because there was this mass pandemic of white guilt, and if we put up our own black guy, we'll neutralize that? Is that one of the reasons why Cain has made it as far as he has, or is that completely off the mark?
I don't think so. I do think that there is this thing where some conservatives feel like, and by the way, I think this is obvious. It should go unstated, but most conservatives are not racist at all, But I think that there is this thing where supporting Cain could prove that. And so, yeah, you like him, he's likable, maybe you like the 999 plan, and then there's this side benefit that, hey, I can't be a racist because I'm supporting Cain. And I do think that conservatives over the years have felt burdened by this negative and untrue stereotype that they somehow are racist. The vast majority of them are not. But I think that there was a benefit to Cain that some people, maybe wasn't the primary reason he caught on, but as maybe an icing on the cake thing, it did allow them to say, hey, this proves it. This proves that I'm not. So I think that there was a bit of a racial component, maybe not the driving force, but I think that it was there. And there is the historic argument. And by the way, this is why I think that Hillary Clinton very well might be the running mate of Barack Obama, because he needs to make history again, too. He needs this to be an historic election again. Obviously, there are chances that Herman Cain could make history by being the first black Republican nominee for president. There's a chance of Marco Rubio being the first Hispanic vice president, and I think Hillary Clinton could be in the mix before it's all over. So it could be quite an interesting year.
The other aspect about this, I touched on it before, that I think is interesting, is it seems to have become, I mean, you're saying that Cain made a misstep in accusing Perry without having the goods. But it also seems to have created a social standard that if Perry did do it, that it would be bad of Perry to have done it. Whereas there seems to have been, if I can get a little historical with you, 1988 or 1987, when Joe Biden got hit by a videotape that was spliced together showing he had not properly attributed a speech from a British political leader in some of his own remarks, so he got hit with a plagiarism charge. And there was this secondary whodunit. Who fed the media this videotape? Which rival did it? And Mike Dukakis went out and said, if anyone on my campaign did this, they're going to be fired. And it turned out it was his right-hand man that did it.
Sasso, right? John Sasso.
John Sasso. And, I mean, Dukakis seemed to legitimately not know that Sasso did it, or else he wouldn't have put his guy out there on the chopping block, and then he did actually fire him. He followed through and he fired him.
And everyone should read, as an aside, everyone should read What It Takes.
Right, this is all mentioned What It Takes. And there's an argument that one of the reasons why Dukakis lost is that he lost his chief strategist in the heat of the campaign because he was he stuck to his own ethical standards. But since that point, every campaign feeds oppo to the media about their opponents. It's become totally commonplace.
It's commonplace, but nobody talks about it, and it's still seen as unseemly. Everyone does it. Nobody talks about it. You don't want to get caught doing it. And by the way, this, politics, a lot of stuff that happens in politics every day, if the average person knew about it, seems really unseemly. You don't talk about it in polite company, but you're right. It's it's what they do, and yet it's seen as like almost criminal.
But is this going to, regardless of what the facts are, whether Perry did do it or not, but having this be injected as a possibility, and the reaction to it being so profoundly negative within Republican circles, is it going to chill the ability for rival campaigns to drop oppo on their rivals right now?
I don't think so. I think that this is the dark arts of opposition research and skullduggery. And by the way, it should be mentioned that Mitt Romney's campaign manager, Matt Rhodes, made his bones in politics as an oppo research director for the RNC. Which is an interesting choice. The guy who runs your campaign, that's their background. That's their expertise. I say that while saying that if one were to look at circumstantial evidence, you certainly would point to Rick Perry. You think that he would probably gain the most from Herman Cain being out of the picture. You would think that 10 days ago, he hires Kurt Anderson from On Message. Kurt Anderson knew about the allegations because he had formerly served as Herman Cain's chief strategist. And it just so happens that Politico gets this story 10 days ago. So the circumstantial evidence would lead one to believe Perry's team was behind it, although there's no proof, and Anderson vehemently denies it, and Mark Block, Cain's current strategist, sort of walked back the allegations today. But anyway, these dark arts have been around. People don't talk about them, but they happen. I would venture to say most news stories about politics are not organically discovered by an enterprising reporter. Most things are given to you by somebody who has an axe to grind. Even stories that aren't political. A lot of times there's a source who knows something and tips off a reporter because they're mad at somebody, or because someone stole their wife, or because someone's making more money as a lobbyist than they are. I would venture to say it's probably seldom like a really enterprising sleuth who discovers things as much as it's someone. A friend of mine says in politics, your friends will work all day to get you elected, but your enemies will stay up all night to defeat you. And that tends to be true. So no,
but it's also
to answer your
possible that
question,
someone who has an axe to grind is not necessarily with the rival campaign. All sorts of people might have an axe to grind about Herman Cain for whatever reason.
right? Someone who worked at the National Restaurant Association who didn't like him, they got passed over for a promotion or whatnot. It's been noted that other members of the board of directors for the National Restaurant Association have contributed to some of Cain's rivals, for what that's worth.
Well, segueing to Perry, the bigger Perry news of the week was the speech he gave in New Hampshire on Friday, which, he was somewhat of an informal demeanor, but someone who was there, or saw it on, I don't know if it was on TV or whatever, but someone who was there saw it, spliced up a video of the highlights, intending to paint Perry in a negative light and suggest that he was, kind of losing it. And I don't know if it went viral right away, but it kind of had a slow burn over a few days to the point where people started speculating wildly that if he was drunk or on drugs. And I just got to say, I watched the video, and I didn't get that impression at all. I thought it was a somewhat informal speech, but it didn't strike me as being eye-poppingly amateurish.
It struck me as really weird. It was bizarre. It was like, I haven't seen the video in context to know if he was impersonating somebody else or trying. It was weird.
Well, it seemed a little different than his past appearances.
It seemed utterly bizarre to me. But they say the people in the audience, like in the crowd, liked it, sort of like the Howard Dean thing.
Right.
But you know what? It seems like Perry got lucky by this Herman Cain stuff happening at the same time. Otherwise, I could have seen the press obsessing over it.
Although, but Perry is still not getting, he hoped that his flat tax proposal, his voluntary flat tax proposal, which is not even a real flat tax, would, really be the game changer in the race and force Cain to have to respond to his sales tax plan.
He stepped on himself.
Romney to either accept the flat tax or defend the progressive income tax. And instead, all the main storyline about Perry is still negative stuff. Even if it is a sideshow to the full-blown Cain circus, he's still not attracting a lot of positive conservative support right now.
Well, that was another
one. It's just something different that conservatives are sort of turning off of Cain because of this and are starting to gravitate back to Perry.
Well, I think that remains to be seen, but it's certainly a plausible scenario. But let me say, the reason Rick Perry's tax plan didn't go anywhere was, number one, I think you're right, he made it optional, which sort of takes a little bit of the sexiness off of it. Maybe it's smarter long term, but short term it made it a little bit less gimmicky. But the other thing is he had the birther controversy at the same time, where he stepped all over his flat tax announcement. Now, I am hearing, apparently Grover Norquist said today that he thinks Romney's going to have his own flat tax proposal. I don't know if that's true or not. I saw Emily Miller from Human Events from Washington Times tweeted it out. But that was another example of Perry stepping on his own message. I don't think it was because the flat tax plan couldn't have worked or couldn't have changed the subject, but he kept talking about birther stuff.
There was an argument when Donald Trump was doing it that was this genius masterstroke.
Right.
He consolidated a niche of the conservative movement by being, mega birther. But I guess Perry's heart didn't seem totally in it. He seemed to sort of try to walk it back after he started dipping his toe in that pool.
I love this new thing where anything somebody does is brilliant. You just don't get it. It's almost like avant-garde art. It's weird that conservatives are embracing this like avant-garde. It's like you just don't get how cool this is. This is totally intentional.
Well, when you're in a situation where your front runners can't break 25%, almost anything you do that gets in the media is guaranteed to put you at least in double digits, just for the mere fact your name's in the paper. So I imagine anything you do could be considered as a masterstroke in that kind of environment. But at some point, someone's going to try to break 30%, aren't they?
Well, You don't necessarily have to to win Iowa. I mean, or New Hampshire. So we'll see. I mean, Romney does not appear to be capable of getting more than 25%.
So, I don't think. I mean, just looking. I mean, I think there's one example where maybe Buchanan won New Hampshire with 28 at one point in maybe 1996. He won it with 28%, I think. But usually, you got to bring at least 30, even in a fractured field. You got to get some kind of critical mass, and I'm just flummoxed at the. I mean, I don't want to. This may start not the right word choice to blame it on the voters, but the inability of conservatives just to pick a horse and say, you know what, we've seen these, we've had a bunch of debates, we've seen their goods and bads. Let's just make a call here. I mean,
this isn't original to me, but I really think the dating analogy is correct. We're still dating, so the things you look for when you're dating are different. Is this person cool? Do they look good? Are they interesting? Are they fun? And then when you start to settle down and think about marriage, you think, is this person dependable? Are they reliable? Are they going to be there in the morning? Do I want to have a family with? I mean, and I think we're still in the dating phase, Bill. And I know someone's going to pull that one out of context, but But
no,
I
that's
think
fair. I mean,
at
look,
some point
Dean was the
you
front
settle
runner
down
for a very long time until 2 weeks before Iowa. So it's not strange for primary voters to have changes of heart, waiting for more information until the last minute.
Right.
But there's certainly, it's not unusual for people called the 1992 Democratic field the seven dwarfs, and Clinton won the nomination, ended up being in third place in general election polling behind Perot and Bush. So not unusual for people to be dissatisfied with choices. But this does strike me as being Republicans seem particularly unnerved and dissatisfied with the lot that they have. There's almost no one that really generates deep enthusiasm and loyalty at this point.
I think that's true, but I don't know that that's uncommon. I mean, Reagan obviously was an anomaly. But think about Republican nominees in the past. I mean, Bob Dole. I mean, you had like Gary Bauer and Pat Buchanan, and you've had Steve Forbes in the past, and what we ended up not. I mean, I think George W. Bush did arouse some excitement. I think on the Democratic side, even Clinton, 92 was considered second tier.
Right.
Zongas, Clinton. I think Obama and Hillary certainly generated excitement. George W. Bush to a certain degree, Reagan certainly. But if you look at George H.W. Bush and Bob Dole and Michael Dukakis, I mean, it's not uncommon. Look at that 88 Democratic field. Gephardt and Gore and Dukakis, and I don't think it's that. I mean, we say, oh, nobody excites, but isn't that sort of like the norm that nobody excites?
Well, I mean, usually I feel someone excites. I mean, sometimes you have an establishment pick that doesn't excite, but the establishment rallies around. And Dole was like that in '96, and Dukakis was like that in '88. But then usually there's someone out there really carrying a banner. Like in '88 it was Jesse Jackson, or in '96 it was Pat Buchanan and Steve Forbes that someone got excited about. But it seems like the conservatives aren't even excited about their conservatives, let alone what to do about their establishment pick in Romney.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cain would be the closest we've come. Bachmann, maybe. Bachmann earlier this year.
For a week.
For a month, probably. But still, I mean, none of these people are Ronald Reagan. I think we know that and can accept that.
But yeah, I mean, again, a seemingly second-tier person can still win at the end of the day if there's enough dissatisfaction with the incumbents. I don't mean to be overly gleeful on the liberal side
right.
This early, but I do think that even Clinton in '92, for all the problems that he had, there still was always a sense that he had political skill, and I guess people think within Romney has political skill. But obviously, there's a lot of question marks about Perry and Cain.
Well, this weird thing has happened that where we sort of like glamorize unprofessionalism. Being really adept at running campaigns is frowned upon in this establishment. It's seen as being establishment. And that's a weird scenario.
Right.
So
well,
I
would
think
have
that's
thought
part of
that
it.
Republicans might have had some sobering after the flameouts of Christine O'Donnell and Joe Miller and Ken Buck.
No.
You know, we tried to really go long ball in 2010, and we got a little burned. So let's take it back a step. We still vote for conservatives. Let's have people who at least know how to hire the right guys and fundraise
it's never,
well.
To me,
it's not about
it's not about ideology. It's the problem with like Sharon Angle, for example, was not that she was too conservative. It's about competence and other issues.
Dukakisian for you. It's competence, not ideology.
Right. I mean, that's what people. If I wrote something bad about Sharon Angle, people would criticize me for being a liberal or a rhino. But my criticism of her was never she's too conservative to win. It was always she's not competent enough to win. She's running a bad campaign. She seems, unelectable. That's always been the criticism.
Right.
It's not that they're too conservative. I by and large, I think that if moderates won, if the way to win was to go moderate, then Bob Dole and John McCain would have won. But, but you have to run a good campaign. And you have to, and that's
if
that's
I was
the problem.
Republican, the biggest concern I would have right now is it's hard to know if anyone's running a good campaign because there's so many obviously bad campaigns. Romney's campaign might look professional by comparison, but I would not say he's really been put to the test. And certainly,
Romney, let me say, Romney, though this is not his first rodeo. Say what you will about Romney. He does run a good operation. He does run a good.
It's the best one of the lot. I'm not disputing that, and I think that
I would say that they're legitimately good at what they do. His people are professional. They're top notch. I think they are very good at what they do. Now they do some things that I think are bad. Like for example, I don't think their outreach to conservatives is especially good or even existent. But in terms of competence. How do you run a press conference? How do you raise money? The blocking and tackling, the stuff you have to do, they're pretty darn good at.
I totally agree. But it's still what Romney's going through right now is nothing like what Obama went through versus Clinton in 2007 and 8. And I think it is very fair to say that the Obama campaign at the end of that process was a whole lot sharper and a whole lot battle-tested and toughened for having gone through that experience, as unpleasant as it was for Democratic voters to have to go through.
But if you guys had different proportional rules, and I know you could argue this is proof of his wisdom, that he knew to win the caucuses, but I would also point out that if the rules were different, Obama very well may not have won, because Hillary Clinton turned it on and won Texas and started really racking up victories. Again, if
Obama had made a couple of missteps in between Iowa and New Hampshire, he might have won. He might have run the table, but not have all of his potential weaknesses aired and addressed before the general election, which might have put him in a weaker position in come the general election.
You could argue that. It's a good argument. I hear what you're saying. I think that it's probably obvious that at this point. Romney has run the best campaign among the Republicans, for what that's worth.
I see somewhat of a parallel potentially. Again, the parallel could be 1992 with Clinton, where a guy wins the nomination in kind of a weak way, still ends up winning at the end of the day because the incumbent is seen so negatively. But in 2004, Democrats flinched on Dean they panicked that he wasn't electable enough at the end of the day,
Right.
and Dean made some missteps towards the end, which fed that concern. And Kerry, who hadn't really been put through the ringer, everyone just sort of glommed onto him and said, well, this guy's definitely the most electable. I mean, geez, he's at least a veteran. That's something. Yeah. And no one thought through, what kinds of things he'll have to deal with until it was too late. Now, I've actually argued it might not have mattered at the end of the day. In a national security election, a Democrat in 2004 might have lost regardless. But Romney seems to have this mantle of electability, but hasn't really been tested. And so conservatives might say, okay, I'll settle for that guy. At least he's electable. Right. And his weaknesses might not have been fully aired out yet, even though it's not his first rodeo.
Well, I think he could be a very competent loser that doesn't embarrass the team. I mean, look, three things happen if Mitt Romney is the nominee. Number one, enthusiasm is down. The Republican rush is going to support him. Laura Ingraham is going to support him. John Boehner is going to support him. So it's not like there'll be this mass defection.
You don't think there wouldn't be a conservative third party if
I think that could happen. You could have like a sort of conservative populist, not from the leaders I just referenced, but from some more the Pat Buchanan wing maybe. I also think nobody works for him. Like maybe, I'll vote for Romney, but I'm not going to go door knocking for him. I'm not going to hand out flyers for him. Or
you don't think conservatives hate Obama enough to do that?
Well, that's the third thing, Bill. It would be an utterly negative campaign because Obama has to go negative. That's the only way he can win. And Romney can't inspire anybody either. So the only way Romney could win would be to scare or anger conservatives enough to vote against Obama. So it becomes an utterly negative campaign on both sides, with neither candidate having any vision or message, and both sides arguing that the other guy's the devil, which may or may not happen anyway. The other thing that happens, too, is depending on who Republicans pick, there's a different stereotype. So if Perry's the nominee, the stereotype is Republicans are dumb redneck kicks, right? If Romney's the nominee, the stereotype is the 1% Wall Street rich guy. And that, for what it's worth, that will happen. So maybe it's pick your poison.
Speaking of that, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Occupy. Because I think in many ways the left is barely even focusing on what's going on your side of the pond, and barely even focusing on some of Obama's legislation. As we speak, the Senate's about to vote for one of Obama's jobs bills, and you're not seeing a huge blog push around it. I mean, some people are talking about it, of course, but the liberal heart is with Occupy right now, and there was an In These Times piece trying to make a case that the movement has already had tangible successes. That the fact that Bank of America reneged on trying to force a $5 a month debit card fee is evidence of the pressure that's being put on them because of what Occupy has generated, and the fact that people are moving their money out of big banks towards smaller banks and credit unions. I mean, the report there wasn't going so far as to say it's definitively true and it's only Occupy, nothing else, but trying to make an indirect argument that it's having a strong contributing factor to it all. And separately, Peter Dreyer, who blogs at Huffington Post regularly, drew a graph calculating how many times the word inequality has shown up in the media over the course of the past year, and showing a big spike in the last month to say that this shows that Occupy is changing the debate. The media is talking about our issues more than they have been because the movement has been so successful. That I wouldn't say any of that is indisputable. It's like you're seeing all discussion of austerity being wiped off the table because of this. There may be some degree of the movement supporters looking to show examples of success so they can help build further momentum, and that's pretty typical in the early stages of movement building. But I imagine the conservative side isn't necessarily looking at Occupy in in awe and fear that it's swamping everything. They're probably still in the mode of trying to mock it.
Well, yeah, mock it and knock it down. A couple stories that I would point out. One, my colleague Will Ron at the Daily Caller had a very interesting story yesterday. He went through New York City arrest records and pointed out that many of the Occupy Wall Street protesters live in luxury. A lot of people pushed back on this story. He mentions that, like, for example, going through the arrest records, the sort of average arrestee had a median value of $305,000 for a home, as opposed to the average median of $185,400. Some people pushed back and said, well, but living in New York's expensive. Actually, it's interesting, when you go through the arrest records, we didn't publicize the people's names or addresses, which we obviously saw. But when you go through the records, you see that very few of the people lived in New York City. Most of them lived out of the state or upstate. So very interesting piece demonstrating
I'm not totally
that,
following what point that makes.
Well, I think the point makes that presumably the people protesting, the 1%, are downtrodden. And in fact, most of these protesters, at least the ones who are getting arrested, are pretty rich, it seems like.
But I mean, the fact that there are wealthy people who agree with the argument that Wall Street needs more regulation, that the wealthy should be taxed more, I don't see that undercuts the main themes of the protesting.
Well, I think they're presenting...
It's not actually meant to be class warfare. It's not actually meant to be, let's vanquish the 1% and bury them under our bloody fists. It's meant to say we want to change these policies.
Fair enough. Also at Hot Air, and I think Breitbart and others posted this, and by the way, I've been on Cain duty, so I've not written about this story at all. Except to say I want it to get very cold, and I want them to be out of McPherson Square. But there's a young lady...
Are they disrupting your commute?
No, I just don't want to see it. It's when I'm getting my cappuccino in the morning. When I'm getting, it's a mess. The whole world is watching. OWS protester talks about assault inside the camp, and there's a video of this woman talking about drug dealing and drug use and rape, for what that's worth. And then the last thing that I would point out is that Ed Morrissey and Hot Air are on a jihad against Men's Warehouse. The owner of the Men's Warehouse, the corporation actually, is supporting, they closed on Wednesday, at least in Oakland, and they put up a sign, "We stand with the 99%, which is interesting because, unlike myself, the guy who owns the Men's Warehouse, it probably is part of the 1%, but I'm glad to see he's standing with the 99% who are looting stores in Oakland, not unlike the Men's Warehouse. So,
well, I think they know who shops at the Men's Warehouse. It's probably not the 1%. But to your other point, I mean, I think sort of the general theme of the conservative blogging around this has been to try to mock the protesters as being crazy or being violent or being anti-Semitic. And this is one of the challenges that the protest organizers have, because the essential model they're trying to create is it to be relatively leaderless. I mean, I doubt it's literally leaderless, but they don't have name leaders. They have this General Assembly concept that anyone can come down to the various Occupy movement happenings, and they can vote in the General Assembly.
So nice.
Don't have need a membership card or anything like that. And to have a very open source model means anyone can show up. I mean, anyone. And there's even been some reports that the left has circulated that the New York Police Department has encouraged homeless people, criminals, drunks, people who are getting into trouble to say, don't do it around me. Take it to Zagati, and try to make it easier to legitimize a crackdown later. At least that's the one conspiracy there.
Tucker, Tucker, by the way, just tweeted out, we have a piece up, why Occupy Wall Street's non-hierarchical vision is unobtainable. So, for what that's worth.
I I would say that's probably indisputable. You're never going to succeed at the end of the day being strictly anti-hierarchy. It's just not practical. But they've taken it as far as they have because it's the novelty of it and the mystique about it has helped generate a lot of additional press coverage, more so than a one-day only mass protest has gotten the left. I mean, and that's analogous to the Tea Party. The Tea Party managed to string a whole line of media coverage by having lots of small rallies that were seemingly organic, and this has been parallel to that. But the downside of it is that anyone can show up, and the people that show up might not be people who agree with your overall goals, or might have other untoward and seemingly and disgusting and immoral plans, and separating the movement from those incidences is I don't think the right has successfully tarred the whole movement with it yet. I feel that stuff has generally existed in the conservative circles, and they've had to do with the more traditional problems with protesting. For example, Occupy Oakland, you get a handful of vandals wanting to smash windows, even though people are there saying, this is not Occupy, this is not helpful, that still is going to get in the press. I think the movement has to deal with that problem. But if there are more actual criminal acts going on, they're going to have to find a way to draw that line, or else they're going to risk having it be defined by that.
Yes, I would agree.
But certainly, I think those concerns are not top of mind on the left right now. I think most folks on the left feel like, they got a good head of steam here. This has been the most successful protest action the left has done in several years, although I might argue the immigrant advocate rallies of 2006 were more successful. Nevertheless, there's been a long history of unsuccessful liberal protesting. This has got at least more media attention, and people are feeling good about that. They want to see it succeed, but of course, as it goes on, where it goes from here still remains to be very uncertain.
Indeed. Well, we'll keep a close eye on it here at the Weekend Blog. As always, a pleasure being in your company, Bill.
As well as you, Matt Lewis. Hope you have a good weekend plan. Any elections going on in Virginia on Tuesday?
Yeah, I don't know anything about them, but I see these signs, so I think there's some sort of state elections.
Are you no longer a Virginia resident?
No, I live in Virginia, but I just don't necessarily believe that voting matters. So. But it's a civic duty and whatnot, so we'll see.
Well, we have hot races here in Northampton, Massachusetts, so I'll be bunkering down, poring over the returns on election night. If anyone wants to follow the Northampton MA hashtag, I'm sure there'll be lots of exciting news to come.
Awesome, man. All right, well, good talking to you, and
you too, sir.
We'll see you next week on The Week and Blog.
Take care.